Alrighty, what's going on, folks? We are here with another reaction video. The last few have been Steam related, specifically Steam Deck specific, reviewing reviews of the Steam Deck. I got some questions about, why would you be reviewing this other reviewers of the Steam Deck? Because I want to see if their criticisms are actually friggin' valid. And ironically, some of them not really, other than I've heard the battery life. That's the biggest thing. But this particular one is from Vashinator, and he talks about why he switched to Linux. And I'm curious to see what his reason for switching to Linux was. So let's roll into this video and see what he's got to say about why he switched to Linux.
Today, I turned in the only Windows computer I had. It was a work laptop, and I'm switching jobs, so I will be using a Mac M1 for my new day job. And this led me to realize I don't have any Windows machines at all anymore. They don't exist in my house. I may have to set up a VM for work or something like that, but I'm now purely a mostly Linux person and occasionally some Mac stuff. And that's kind of cool to me because I would have never expected that to be the case when I started using Linux in November 2018. So I wanted to talk about kind of why I ended up switching to Linux in the first place, and also just some of the changes that has brought about, because there's some really cool changes that I've noticed just due to that simple choice. We'll go back just a little bit and give some background. First, I tried Linux in about 2008, but I was having an issue with the hard drive on the PC at the time, so it was just not a great experience. I also just didn't really understand Linux that well at that point, and I'm still learning a lot in Linux, to be fair anyway. I was one of those people, I was into tech quite a bit. I was using Windows constantly for my day job. I would come home, I would hop on my computer, and I would talk on TeamSpeak or Mumble with friends, and we would play PC games. And that's how I ended up spending a lot of my time. But as time went on, I just began to feel like Windows was fighting me more and more and more. And at one point, my main desktop PC went down, and I really didn't have any motivation to fix it. Hadn't been particularly using it overly much, and I had no desire to fix it to the point where I could use it again and just get stuck in Windows all over again. So I was using a laptop and just kind of doing anything that I had to do on a computer there. Otherwise, I was basically using my phone, which, is kind of what most people do now. Around US Thanksgiving.
So he is not wrong. The form factor has changed to, computing is the slab that we use nowadays. Um, that is generically, unless you specifically jump into Linux firsthand, that most users who eventually end up making the switch are coming from Mac or Windows. And people who end up making the switch are those that have dipped their toes in it long enough. There's always that Windows machine, the backup. There's always that Mac, that's the backup, that safety net that we always hope and wish for in case something goes wrong. He talks about not understanding it back in like 2008 when he first tried it. And yeah, kind of wading through the waters can be fairly complicated at times, not gonna lie. Um, Things have gotten a little bit easier with that. A lot of distros focus specifically on the mythical new user. New user is relative to Linux specifically. There's distros that try to emulate Windows specifically. Linux FX is one of them. There's a few others that try to emulate a lot of what Windows look and feel and that kind of stuff. But he's not wrong that when you first jump into Linux, sometimes the amount of choice, because you're coming from a fairly duopoly type of mentality where they shove their view of desktop computing or using a laptop, desktop, whatever, as your primary motivator, kind of down your throat, your corporate overlords as you were. And the thing that Linux does is it makes personal computing personal again, so you can pretty much do whatever you want with the machine and the software and all the other stuff. So coming from that frame of mind, where you have two choices to where you have tons of choices with different package management. So a lot of it now is package management is specific. A lot of it has gotten less so with things like Flatpak snaps and app images and all the other stuff. So I definitely understand where he's coming from with that. So let's keep going.
2018, a friend of mine started using Linux, and I know Proton had just come out, I believe, that summer and was kind of in its infancy stage. And I was like, okay, maybe it's time to give Linux another shot. I'm just over Windows. I really want to try something different anyway. So I installed Linux on an external hard drive. I went with Mint because that was the one that I could get to cooperate with my hybrid graphics laptop at the time. And for the most part, it worked very well. Hybrid graphics was a bit of a pain to deal with, but once I got everything kind of set up and running, it just kind of worked.
In fairness, hybrid graphics are still kind of a pain in the butt. So this machine that this is being done on is a Garuda Linux machine. This is the capture is actually being done from the Steam Deck. The hybrid graphics situation doesn't rely necessarily so much on things like Bumblebee right here anymore. You have prime offloading and a few other things where you can go in and change that. Optimus Manager Qt gives you a graphical user interface to actually change all that stuff so you can tell it what to use and what not to use, etc. So I definitely understand where it's coming from, though. Hybrid graphics in 2018, 19, etc. was horrible as far as like the user experience, because you would get times where if you had an example a NVIDIA slash Intel machine, it would default to the Intel, and then you would have to do like things like no mode set in order to actually use the NVIDIA drivers. In order to do that, you had to make sure, then you had to go through and blacklist like the Intel driver, and then you're only using full power on the dedicated GPU, so that your battery life tanks. Things have improved. Now it's a lot of the times it just requires it's either a restart or a simple log in, log out to actually make the switch over. So things have improved in that direction. So definitely understand the pain there.
I think I even tried to record 1080p video, and I was able to do that and even play around with editing some of it at that point, I believe. After about 30 days on the external hard drive, I decided I haven't been booting into Windows. I don't really see a need to. So I'm going to copy what files I need, and I'm going to install this on bare metal and just do it that way. And
I will also like to note that bare metal is the best way to experience Linux. Pros and cons on that, of course. So if you are going to install Linux on bare metal, I would highly recommend you swap out drives, have a different drive for, if you need that Windows or Mac OS safety net to make sure you can go back to those if for some reason it doesn't work. And the live environments, generically not always, are a good indication of how well your hardware will work with the machine.
I did. Everything started working out. I ran that for several months. I ended up starting doing distro challenges with the Big Daddy Linux community at the time. I broke my grub.
So for those that don't know, Big Daddy Linux Live is now Linux Saloon, which you can catch every Saturday still. I believe it's 8 p.m. Eastern. Cubicle Nate and a few others from the Tux Digital Network run that particular show.
Several times and had to learn about Refind, I believe it is, and fix it that way. And for the most part, I was just learning lots of new things in Linux, trying to see what things I could breaking a lot of things, and eventually the NVIDIA graphics actually ended up breaking that install, and I had to kind of jump to Ubuntu Mate. And once I got there, they had that new kind of tool that lets you select which graphics card you could do in the menu, and I was able to do that and use that. So I ended up playing around with many different distros during this time. I think I even installed Arch Linux the hard way at one point and learned a lot.
When he says Arch Linux the hard way, he means quote unquote Arch Linux the right way. So that means reading the wiki and going through the install process that way. Not my way personally of experience Arch. I've done it, and usually I'm left with the question of, okay, and the point was. So to each their own when it comes to that particular end of the things. And by the way, this is again Garuda is based on Arch. So by the way, everyone Arch.
About a year later, about a year after starting this, so around again Thanksgiving 2019, I started building a new machine and I put in a Ryzen 3900X, 32 gigs of RAM, really a great all around PC for me, which I could really grow into and use. Shortly after that is when I actually started making videos. By the way, don't go back and watch these videos, they are not good. I ended up installing Manjaro in that machine, and that Manjaro install is still running today. I have had like two issues with it. One was, surprise, surprise, an NVIDIA graphics driver issue that I was able to TTY and just reinstall the driver, and I believe everything worked out from there. The other was a pipewire issue that I probably kind of exacerbated at one point. But as I kind of got more into Linux, that is where I started really looking at doing the YouTube channel. So if I had stayed in Windows, I do not think I'd be doing anything in YouTube right now. Maybe I would be doing something gaming related. I don't know, but I find it unlikely. And that would be because I just probably wouldn't want to sit on the computer long enough to do that. In addition to all that, though, I've learned many different things about Linux. I've thought about learning many other subjects too, like Python. Python is something that I always wanted to learn more, but I just never did. But once I had kind of gotten back into the groove of really being more into tech and learning lots of things about Linux, I eventually decided that I wanted to really focus on learning some Python. And I started doing that. And learning Python is what actually got me the job that I just left. So Linux indirectly got me that job. Linux also indirectly got me my next job because I ended up learning a lot and learning what I did and didn't like about my employer and kind of pushed me to the point where I was ready to say, okay, I think I may be ready to look at going somewhere else. And, here we are. It kind of fell in my lap, but now I'm starting a new job Monday, and that's kind of partially due to Linux because
So this is not the first story I've heard in regards to how some people have gotten jobs as sysadmins, Linux admins, or something related to Linux in the back end um, when it comes to tech because of them being a user of Linux at home on the desktop. So Linux is a great dev environment because a lot of the dev tools are available. You can talk ABIs and APIs and all the other stuff about whether or not they're stable and uniformity and blah, 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 blah. All the typical stuff you'll hear. A lot of the strength is the versatility that it gives you. So if you want to program in Python, if you want to, set up an IDE of insert thing here, you generically can in Linux. So that does tend to help. Also, dealing with a lot of the back end stuff, if you have, network issues and all the other stuff locally, usually you can solve those. You can usually then, therefore, apply those on a sysadmin level, which is also helpful. So it's cool to always hear the stories of a desktop Linux user actually being able to be like, oh, well, I got a job doing Linux stuff now. Cool. I always enjoy those stories because it's a success story based on curiosity and knowledge and a willingness to always learn, and that's something that we don't have enough of when it comes to things like Mac OS and Windows and that kind of stuff. Windows, a lot of Windows users, oh, it just works. No, Windows, you've just learned for the last 30 years just to put up with its idiosyncrasies, and for anybody who has Mac OS, just works. Try recording your desktop audio. I'm just gonna say.
and I don't know what things would have been like. I don't know what things I would have really tried to explore. I'd be very curious at what my life would look like when it comes to just wanting to learn new things. And so indirectly, Linux ended up getting me that job as well because Linux ultimately kind of reignited my desire to learn things about tech and learn things about coding and programming and whatever. And there are many other things that I want to learn. I want to learn more about Flatpaks. I want to learn more about Python still. I want to learn maybe some Lua. I want to learn more Vim. And that might be a live stream you see soon, is me starting to really work on Vim. I just find it interesting how Linux kind of pushed me back into the tech world.
So as far as Lua, I would actually, Vash, I will make the recommendation. I believe the scripts, if I remember correctly, for the game Natural Selection 2, a lot of that stuff is written in Lua, which I don't think a lot of people know. And it was intentionally done. So I've talked to the devs from Unknown Worlds who originally made Natural Selection 2, and they've talked a little bit about that. And it was a conscious choice. So it was a language they knew and they felt was elegant enough and easy enough to program in. So you might want to give Natural Selection 2 a look at if you want to do some Lewis scripting. Just a recommendation.
Back into really wanting to learn more about tech because I just don't think I would have done that had I stayed on Windows. And again, I'm not trying to bash Windows. It's just that I felt like Windows was fighting me. But for the most part, I feel like Linux gets out of my way and at times can even enhance my workflow in ways that would be a lot more difficult on the Windows side of things.
Uh huh.
I just found this all kind of interesting because switching to Linux is ultimately what led me to getting really back into tech, learning a lot more about various aspects of technology, and even going to the Mac a little bit. And that indirectly led me to a job and a job now. So I just found it really interesting. I would be very curious what I'd be like without my time in Linux at this point. It also kind of makes me wonder about people in a similar situation to me. Like, what people are out there that are frustrated by Windows, but they'd actually be more into tech if they went with a Mac or if they went with Linux? Because just the way they think or the way they work or whatever else that whatever particular operating system they're using is holding them back on. I don't know the answer to that, but I just find it interesting that the switch to Linux has ended up changing so many aspects to me that, again, I just don't think would have happened had I stayed on Windows.
So again, this isn't the first time I've heard that, but it's always nice to hear kind of the reflection of like what would happen if I was still on X, Windows, Mac, whatever, whatever you're going to for tech, and you decide to make technology changes and technology choices, and you find out that those choices actually lead you down a better hole of life than you were before. So consider this kind of a success story of what can happen when you switch to Linux. Is it for the tech files and all the other stuff? It can be. But if you consider yourself a quote unquote power Windows user of Windows or Mac OS, etc., how many times are you gonna reg hack Windows to make it do things you want it to do as opposed to what Microsoft wants it to do? How many times are you gonna drop into the terminal to unhide options that Apple hides within from the GUI, like installing stuff from outside the software store or unsigned packages and all the other stuff. I know they've re-implemented some of the stuff in that recently. Again, I speak up to Catalina on that one. So the point though is these type of stories are always interesting to hear because Lennox gave him a different life outcome than the career track and maybe the career path he was originally on. And it's not something to take for granted. It's not something that only the tech files can do. As Vash pointed out, that was not his area of interest, generically speaking, but it got him back into it, and that's something that I think is a strength that we don't talk a lot about in the Linux community, is that it reignites your interest in technology, your interest in learning, your interest in having knowledge, your interest in how things work. And it doesn't, and those things don't all coalesce around technology. It's just, it piques your curiosity and it makes you want to understand how other things work in life. So I always find it interesting when these are shown. So I got nothing to rag on as far as the video. So most people are gonna expect me to be shitting all over it and all this other stuff, and I got no reason to. It's a success. It's a personal success story for Vash as far as what worked for him and how it changed a trajectory in his life. And I think that's something we should highlight more often in the community than we do. So, other than that, I got nothing really else to add. Vash, keep on learning, keep that open mind, and keep bringing you that success and those different paths and interest and knowledge that you're looking for, bud. So, other than that, I will catch you guys on the flip side. Peace.